The pandemic continues to dominate the lives of most New Yorkers. Our Mayday calls have gone unanswered. Some are wondering if we'll be forced to stay in our homes until we go bankrupt or crazy from cabin fever. But at the edges of the great pause, I've seen the best of what makes us human returning to the sunlight. People still care for each other, even during a time of plague. Not all of us worry about whether it's still legal to share French fries or a kiss. A month ago, Times Square looked abandoned. Now it's transformed into a sparsely populated amusement park for the young and fearless. The area around 42nd and Broadway feels liberated somehow, no longer confined to its usual role as a crass, overcrowded money-making machine for the old and covetous. So there are some silver linings to the lockdown. Rampant consumerism has been dialed back. The air is cleaner. Men are washing their hands more often. But at the same time, we seem to be witnessing a slow descent into medical martial law. The myth of America as the land of the free and the home of the brave is imploding right in our N95 masked faces. All the public libraries remain closed, cutting off internet access for many of the poor and homeless, who always suffer most under the live and let die ethos of late-stage capitalism. Our massive grid of bus stops and subway stations, crucial to the lives of millions, remains restricted to essential workers only. On May 6th, New York City subways were closed overnight for the first time since 1904, so they could be disinfected. Grand Central now looks like an abandoned skating rink. Or a deconsecrated cathedral. Despite the shelter-in-place orders from Governor Andrew Cuomo, not yet strictly enforced by fines or jail time unless you try barbecuing, people can be found admiring the glories of spring in Central Park, even if most of them look like casually dressed ER doctors. We adapt, but what are we losing along the way?
I'm a native New Yorker, 55 years old. I've been out here all my life. I've never seen anything like this. I've lost 3 family members in the last 30 days, and I'm nervous, I'm scared, along with everybody else. This is something like we've never seen before. I have a friend that lost 6 family members within the last 40 days.
So the COVID-19?
All due to COVID-19. Both of my aunts were in nursing homes up in the Bronx. They both passed away. And as of right now, I'm on the Upper East Side, and I'm looking at all the businesses that are closed. It's really going to be rough to dig our way out of this. New York is not the same. I don't think anything will be the same after this. This is something that we're going through right now, and I really pray to God that we get out of it. I pray that we get out of it. I miss my family. I miss my aunts. We couldn't bury them. There was no contact as far as funerals. There was no anything. It's just like they passed away and they're gone. So everything in a nutshell, it's pretty serious, and it hurts, and it hurts. It hurts.
Why can some people fight off COVID-19 with no trouble at all, while others are knocked out by it? I know that age and comorbidities are huge factors, but why does the virus disproportionately kill black people, especially when compared to the Swedes and Vietnamese? If you read the New York Post, you could be forgiven for thinking that COVID-19 is being intentionally spread in some places, like nursing homes.
New York knew for months that the virus was extra lethal in, of course, elderly and nursing home populations, as everyone's reporting. I mean, that's common knowledge. Governor sent out a directive to nursing homes, said that they can't deny patients to nursing homes that they suspect have COVID-19. So they had to take these patients.
If there's one data point my 6-year-old daughter understands about COVID-19, it's that grandma needs to be kept away from this thing. So what was Cuomo thinking? Was there a reason behind this?
None that I could see. And again, the New York Post has hammered him on this. He's been questioned about it too, and he really has been forthright with any type of real explanation.
Bumping off all those old grannies and aunties frees up a ton of money that was going into Medicare payments and Social Security checks.
This is the same guy that talks about overabundance of caution with the policy, using data to reopen the economy, to drive the policies. And this policy he puts out for the nursing homes, it seems to fly in the face of all of that.
Capitalism is out of control, and our state and federal governments have become lobbyist-bought tools to further the capitalist agendas. The modus operandi of the too-big-to-jail capitalists seems to be merge toward monopoly status, move profits offshore, and socialize all losses with American tax dollars. That rapacious way of doing business has been wreaking hell on our country since at least Ronald Reagan's first day in office.
Behind me are 237 abandoned homes, bought up by the government almost 2 years ago, after President Carter declared a federal disaster here at the Love Canal. The reason was the surfacing of more than 80 types of chemicals, many of them deadly, buried by the Hooker Corporation some 40 years ago.
It's bad enough that New York has already indulged the self-serving conceits of megalomaniacs like Michael Bloomberg, Jeffrey Epstein, and Donald Trump. But now Governor Cuomo seems intent on handing over both city and state to his rich friends, the technocrats, those robber barons of surveillance capitalism, who pretend to know what's best for us.
You've said elsewhere, the economy is not going to be anything like it was. It's going to take a long time to recover. It's going to be, people are going to be surprised at how slow and how fitful this is.
The economy is not going to be anything like it was. It's going to take a long time to recover. It's going to be, people are going to be surprised at how slow and how fitful this is.
Cuomo has invited Bill Gates to reimagine education for the New York public school system, even though the Gates Foundation's Common Core experiment was a flaming fucking disaster. Cuomo has also asked Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, to reimagine New York public services like telehealth, remote learning, and broadband access. He might as well ask Jeff Bezos to reimagine New York's labor unions and workers' rights policies next. In a show of integrity that Bezos quite obviously lacks, Amazon Web Services Vice President Tim Bray resigned on May 1st, citing, as his reasons for leaving, a vein of toxicity running through the corporate culture, and his own dismay at Amazon firing whistleblowers who were making noise about warehouse employees frightened of COVID-19. It's clear now that the predator class will be using the pandemic as an excuse to seize wealth and assets from everyone else. The Federal Reserve has hired BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, to administer several of the central bank's new debt-buying programs. So BlackRock will be out there using the Fed's zero-interest money to scoop up lockdown-crippled assets for pennies on the dollar. Then, when the lockdown ends and prices start rising again, BlackRock can cash in. That's one of the many ways in which wealth is redistributed from the poor and middle classes to the rich in this country. Those closest to the Fed's money spigot always get the best deals. It's known as the Cantillon effect, but calling it Robin Hood in reverse might make more sense. As if all that wasn't bad enough, Forbes magazine informs us that the pandemic is being used as a testbed for new surveillance technologies that may threaten privacy and civil liberties.
As America shoots past 1 million infected with coronavirus and more dead than during the Vietnam War, various governments around the world are talking about using smart city technology to trace where infected people go and who they come in contact with. Well, that sounds great, right? Who doesn't want to end this pandemic? But it turns out there's a problem with tracking every man, woman, and child. And that problem, stop me if you've guessed it, is that they're tracking every man, woman, and child.
So aside from being a global health crisis, the coronavirus has effectively become an experiment in how to monitor and control people at scale.
Oh, goody! I love being a gerbil for the ruling dick helmets.
It's a $100 million MTA project, anti-terror technology. Could it one day include facial recognition?
Hello, how are you doing today? Does capitalism lead you? Does capitalism threaten to hurt you? Does capitalism enjoy your time? Does capitalism believe you and extricate you? Does capitalism isolate you?
This pandemic is working out so well for the globalists that you almost have to assume they have another bioengineered virus waiting in the wings for phase 2, which, if we can believe Bill Gates, will probably arrive as a false flag bioterrorism event.
That the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of flu.
The lockdown for COVID-19 was likely just a practice run for a much deadlier pandemic to come.
Does capitalism isolate you? Does capitalism isolate you?
Dystopian surveillance state hellholes, class system reinforcing social credit scores, smartphones, microchip implants, and ID 2020 quantum dot tattoos used as slave trackers. Our future's so bright, we'll have to wear shades.
Does capitalism isolate you?
Well, I'm really blessed and worldly wise. I'm a pippin' Tom attacking with X-ray eyes. Things are going great and they only getting better. Ooh, I'm doing alright. Get grace, the future's so bright. I gotta wear shades. I gotta wear shades. Ooh, 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 ooh.
We did as we were told. We put our careers on hold and shut down our businesses to flatten the curve. We took our children out of school and set them in front of computers for hastily improvised remote learning courses. We wore ugly face masks and isolated ourselves from family and friends so the old and frail wouldn't get sick. Even if they were rich, already retired boomers who despised the idea of Medicare for all. We did all that so the hospitals wouldn't be overwhelmed and the ICUs would have enough ventilators.
We have a real equipment problem. The way we needed missiles in world wars, we need ventilators.
But the ventilators turned out to be the wrong treatment. In New York, nearly 9 out of every 10 COVID patients on ventilators ended up dying.
Virus? Like what? Like SARS?
I don't know. All I know is that it's highly infectious and may be fatal.
So what's the right treatment? No one at the World Health Organization or the Centers for Disease Control seems to know.
Let's get one thing straight, Mr. Smith. I'm responding to political pressure, trying to get a handle on this animal. Damn efficient airborne transmission. Blood tests and swabs aren't telling us much. We know it acts like a virus. It causes high fever and respiratory distress. So tracking and treating a mysterious outbreak like this would take the CDC months. Whatever it is, it originated in China.
There's got to be something I can do.
Other, less co-opted doctors have some ideas, like using hydroxychloroquine in combination with zinc. But where's the money in that?
Chloroquine, that's an anti-malarial drug.
No. Listen, it suppresses the enzyme.
Why cure the relatively small percentage of COVID-19 patients needing medical intervention with safe, inexpensive, generic drugs, when you can scare almost every person on the planet into paying for a potentially dangerous new vaccine?
What happened? We started everyone on chloroquine, stopped the thing dead in its tracks. Now, the CDC would have figured it out eventually, but not in time.
Do you find good results giving hydroxychloroquine to mild to moderate patients? Do you find good results?
Every patient that I've treated, serious, moderate, has had resolution of symptoms within 24 hours. They are improved within 5 hours. The fevers are gone within 2 days. The lung restriction, which is the most important, resolves within about 4 to 5 hours. You see dramatic improvement. It's incredible. I'm surprised myself. I have severe patients in the office. I have patients that have been diagnosed with pneumonia and been turned away from clinics. I've got patients that have been turned away from hospitals. I've got patients coming in with temperatures of 102.9, white blood cell counts of 17,000, all positive COVID tests. Their physicians are refusing to give them medication for fear that they are going to be in trouble with the licensing board. And now the issue we have now is I've got pharmacists that are refusing to fill this medication. And so this is critical now. I have a huge problem on my hand. I have patients that are coming in from Austin, Houston, San Antonio. These are not my patients. This is ridiculous.
If you want to get to pre-coronavirus, that might not ever happen in the sense of the fact that the threat is there. But I believe with the therapies that will be coming online and with the fact that I feel confident that over a period of time we will get a good vaccine, that we will never have to get back to where we are right back now.
As of mid-May, the curve has been crushed flat. But now it seems Gates and Fauci want us to stay at home until they can develop their miracle vaccine. For all we know, that might be like waiting to see a Godzilla-sized electric sea slug belching fire on Fifth Avenue. A successful vaccine has never been developed for any coronavirus. Not for SARS, not for MERS, not even for the common cold. So far, every potential coronavirus vaccine the big pharma scientists have come up with has been ineffective or caused horrific side effects. If they bypass normal protocols and rush into human trials with new, untested mRNA vaccines, as they're doing now in Operation Warp Speed, the outcomes are likely to be the same, or worse. So what's the real reason for keeping us in lockdown? Is this pandemic being used to destroy the world economy, or liquidate it, to further the agenda of globalist-minded surveillance state ghouls, who would like nothing more than to impose a draconian digital neo-feudalism on all but the richest and most corrupt among us? Would that explain why big tech and big media seem so intent on silencing dissenting doctors who just want to practice good medicine and stay true to the Hippocratic Oath?
This doesn't make any sense. We wear masks in an acute setting to protect us. We're not wearing masks. Why is that? Because we understand microbiology, we understand immunology, and we want strong immune systems. Our immune system is used to touching. We share bacteria, staphylococcal, streptococcal bacteria, viruses. We develop an immune response daily to this stuff. When you take that away from me, my immune system drops. As I shelter in place, my immune system drops. You keep me there for months, it drops more. And now I'm at home, hand washing vigorously, washing the counters, worried about things that are indeed what I need to survive.
You're not immunodeficient and you're not elderly. You should be able to go out without any gloves and without a mask. I think if you are those things, you should either shelter in place or wear a mask and gloves. I don't think everybody needs to wear a mask and gloves because it reduces your bacterial flora. It doesn't allow you to interact with society, and your bacteria flora and your viruses, your friends that protect you from other diseases, end up going away, and now you're more likely to get opportunistic infections that are hoping you don't have your good bugs fighting for you, if that makes sense.
And then as we all come out of shelter in place with a lower immune system and start trading viruses and bacteria, what do you think is going to happen? Disease is going to spike.
I guarantee when we reopen, there's going to be a huge amount of illness that's going to be rampant.
The building blocks of your immune system is virus and bacteria, end of story.
Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
My hunch is that we'll never be told the truth about this pandemic from mainstream media sources, just as we were never told the truth about the Kennedy assassination. I look at it this way. If ex-CIA director Allen Dulles had masterminded the assassination of JFK, would there be any reason to believe Dulles was telling us the truth about that assassination when he served on the Warren Commission? Similarly, if Dr. Anthony Fauci had his figurative finger up a Chinese horseshoe bat's rectum so he and his team of amoral scientists could weaponize a bioengineered coronavirus that would trigger a worldwide pandemic, which would accelerate plans of the globalists and generate untold billions or trillions for his amoral big pharma cartel pals, should we seriously expect Dr. Fauci to tell us the truth about the origins of that pandemic, or how it might be stopped with already existing low-cost cures? It's no secret how enmeshed Big Pharma is with Washington and with its political leaders and health officials like Dr. Fauci, who heads up the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, while also benefiting from numerous close ties to other organizations funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum. The revelation that China's Wuhan Institute of Virology received millions of dollars in funding from the U.S. government for work on SARS-like coronaviruses, greenlit by none other than Dr. Fauci in 2015 as an end-around to the 2014 NIH ban on funding gain-of-function virus studies, is but one of many instances in a long trail of morally dubious activities.
In 2014, the same year that Obama stopped Fauci's federal funding in the United States, the funding of the same research shifted to a laboratory in Wuhan, where the money rolled in the form of grants. Some numbers have been tossed around in the media and at White House briefings. $3.7 million over the span of several years, all the way up to $7.4 million. The reality is, that's the money we know about, but there is a high likelihood it is much, much more. Reports have shown that researchers traveled 1,000 miles away to the caves of Yunnan to obtain the bats. And the crazy thing is, they traveled 1,000 miles to basically violate all these bats in these caves, and they took rectal swabs from them and harvested the virus. Honestly, who comes up with this stuff? Who is sitting around at the Monday meeting giving orders to go spelunking for bats, and then proceeding to give these bats rectal swabs? Perhaps the more important question is, why does the United States have an embassy right in the heart of Wuhan? And why is the United States funding bat rectal swab research in another country? The theory surrounding these questions deals with the CIA, who knew China was emerging as a serious competitor. And the United States funded this lab so they could keep an eye on what the Chinese were up to. And the Chinese gladly took the cash and America's bioweapon secrets. CIA, China, no one's a victim here, just opportunistic predators.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation exists, but Bill and Melinda Gates also have something called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust, which is where they can profit. And these things work together. They push for vaccines, and in the meantime, they're investing in vaccine companies with their trust. And all of these guys are doing the same thing. Okay, they set all of this up. They set this up as the repository for where they were going to demand we send the money to. Right? The World Economic Forum mafia, basically. The Davos set. That's them again. And then they make this whole sham, pretending there's a whole bunch of different organizations involved, but really it's all just them again, to write reports, which then produces a pandemic planning event where all they really focus on is controlling the message and getting finance. Get this financed.
Get that financed.
Then what happens? Boom! A real coronavirus pandemic happens. Really? Incredible.
Kiss me.
It's basically like protection money racket. When the mafia comes swinging into town and they go into the they go into the pizza parlor and they say, there's a problem around here with your windows getting smashed out. We can help you with that. We can make sure your windows don't get smashed out. And the person says, the pizza parlor owner says, there's no problem. I've never seen anybody's windows get smashed out. And that night after he locks up, sure enough, his windows get smashed out. And now he wishes he had have paid the protection money, right? So this allows them to now say, well, country leaders, we tried to warn you. We tried to get you to pay up before, but now look what's happened. Now everybody's dying in all the hospitals. Now our economies are going in the toilet. Please give us the money now, or it's just gonna get worse. And aren't they saying that? It's just gonna get worse. This is the new normal. Funny enough, the title of one of the reports that the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board commissioned. Isn't that a coincidence? And sure enough, our leaders are turning tail and ponying up the dough.
You get back to the hotel and stay there.
I like it here.
Go on, get moving.
I said, I like it here.
Well, I can change that in a hurry.
Bitches ain't shit but hoes, I've been on this. Niggas gon' snitch regardless, mid shoulders. Never gon' switch, my mama right soldier. Show me that profit, coughed and right rovers up. I'm up now, these hoes all in love now. Wanna fuck now, they beg to bend over.
This plague of big pharma corruption goes all the way back to the Reagan era, when 2 laws were passed that made vaccines much more enticing for future biopsyops profiteers. The more widely known of the two was the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which indemnified Big Pharma against all harm their vaccines might cause. With the passage of that legislation, vaccine safety concerns could take a back seat in the drive for vaccine profits. Vaccine manufacturers could no longer be sued for damages in a civil action, even if their vaccines were the cause of chronic autoimmune disease, paralysis, or death.
For some diseases, the vaccine can make catching the virus even more deadly by making the immune system's response work against the body in what is called antibody-dependent enhancement.
And there are diseases in which you vaccinate someone, they get infected with what you're trying to protect them with, and you actually enhance the infection. You can get a good feel for that in animal models.
This was the case in the original SARS vaccine that was trialed in animals. And as we know, COVID-19 is a type of SARS, so it's likely going to face the same problem. Except Bill Gates is skipping the animal trials this time.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein.
There's a lot of other things that they have developed in tandem with a lot of these DARPA-backed vaccine technologies that are being promoted as well. It's not just these injectable sensors, but there's also things like injectable nanotechnologies that these new vaccine technologies, specifically the RNA and DNA vaccines that they're promoting now, in order for them to actually work, they have to be combined with nanotechnology. And if you look at what DARPA also funds and has been funding for years in the field of nanotechnology, it's all very disturbing. And one of their uses for that are what they call a brain-machine interface, which DARPA has been funding since 2002. And this goes back to Dick Cheney, who was very enthusiastic about that program. So that should, show you what kind of politician is interested in this type of research, right? But these days, it's under a different program that's called N3, that's about non-invasive neural platforms. And basically, these are also injectable nanobots that with the right magnetic frequency can control, they basically openly say they can influence human thoughts. They can induce the appearances of images directly into the brain and a lot of this stuff. They claim that this will help soldiers being treated with PTSD, but DARPA themselves, if you listen to what their leadership actually says, one of them, a former director named Michael Goldblatt, he said he sees no difference in a brain implant that controls people's thoughts and a cochlear implant that helps the deaf hear. So a lot of times these technologies are sold as helping us with healthcare, but the people actually involved in researching this stuff see no difference between those types of applications and these horrific dystopian applications that totally would upend human freedom and human thought and independence as we know it, right? Would the government misuse this technology? I mean, I think your audience has an answer to that,
Well, typically, everything is always weaponized first. Anyways, any things that could be used to better humanity always end up getting weaponized and used against it. Now, we have seen that recently, Inovio Pharmaceuticals Incorporated has been receiving funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in addition to DARPA, who you just mentioned, and the Department of Defense, among others. What exactly are they up to? Is it this work here? I know that they're trying to develop a vaccine, but I mean, this is mind-blowing, scary. I mean, just those groups alone.
Right. So Inovio Pharmaceuticals really early on got funding from the different organizations you mentioned to develop a DNA vaccine for coronavirus. And at the same time, there was another company that's also DARPA-backed called Moderna that had an RNA vaccine. DNA vaccines and RNA vaccines are a category of vaccine that have been around for a couple years, but have never, ever, ever been approved for human use. And one of the reasons is because they don't generate the immune response necessary. But if you look at what these people say, they say the way to generate that immune response is to combine those vaccines with nanotechnology. And that has been totally removed from a lot of the articles giving positive PR to Inovio and to Moderna. The DNA vaccines are actually really nuts if you actually read about how they're injected into you. It's not with a needle and syringe. You have to basically have muscle tissue exposed, and they like use this crazy, what the DARPA calls a gene gun, and then they like electrocute that part of like exposed muscle, so like your cells take up the DNA. And actually, if you look at other DARPA tools that involve the use of what they call artificial chromosomes, they've basically done experiments about adding a 47th chromosome to the human body that can be used for a variety of applications. And they say it's for healthcare again, but they also say that it could be used as a weapon to subvert the DNA of enemies at the genetic level. And if you remember back to, the Project for a New American Century, September 2000 document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, they talk openly about, race-targeted, genetically targeted bioweapons and things of this nature. And the fact that people like Dick Cheney were, responsible in a lot of ways for putting DARPA on this path is honestly very concerning. And as I mentioned earlier, they are selling this to us as, this will help protect us and keep us safe. Or in the case of this biosensor, prevent the next pandemic. We're hearing that from a lot of people now. This is pandemic 1. There's going to be a pandemic 2. We have to prevent the next pandemic before it starts. They are setting up this narrative where they're basically doing pre-crime on a healthcare level and saying that we have to basically submit to these technologies for our own good. But if you actually look at the admitted purposes for what DARPA wants this for, it just opens up a whole can of worms that really destroys the official narrative and shows that this has the most insane potential for misuse compared to any other technologies that are in common use right now.
The second and more obscure law that greased the grooves for the global vaccine mafia was something called the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980. Dr. Judy Mikovits does an excellent job of explaining how that law can be abused to profit Big Pharma at the expense of American taxpayers.
How can a man who's giving, any person who's giving global advice for health, own a patent in the solution in the vaccine? Isn't that a conflict of interest, or shouldn't it be?
It is a conflict of interest. And in fact, this is one of the things that I've been saying and would like to say to President Trump: repeal the Bayh-Dole Act.
Bayh-Dole fundamentally changed the way universities approach technology transfer, and you can see that best in the statistics. Universities obtain 16 times as many patents today as they did in 1980. Now, everybody's getting more patents, but still, universities' share of all patents in the United States is more than 5 times greater than it was before Bayh-Dole. The situation has gotten so bad that one information technology industry official has publicly referred to universities as, quote, crack addicts, unquote, driven by, quote, small-minded tech transfer offices addicted to patent royalties.
That act gave government workers the right to patent their discoveries, so to claim intellectual property for discoveries that the taxpayer paid for. Ever since that happened in the early 80s, it destroyed science. And this allowed the development of those conflicts of interest. And this is the crime behind letting somebody like Bill Gates with billions of dollars, nobody elected him, he has no medical background, he has no expertise, but we let people like that have a voice in this country while we destroy the lives of millions of people.
I think it's rather odd to assume that a guy that used to head Microsoft in the most ruthless way and was basically, climbed to the top, bashing heads together and being like a corporate predator, all of a sudden he opens a foundation and we're supposed to think that all he cares about is helping poor kids in Africa. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it, since we were going to go into the Jeffrey Epstein scandal at some point, Epstein had a close relationship with Bill Gates, and this is important for several reasons. One, Bill Gates has tried really hard to cover up his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. extensively so. They were very involved, and their ties go back at least to the 1990s. This has not been reported by mainstream media, but it's documented. Okay, there's a 2001 report in the UK newspaper, The Evening Standard, about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew. It was essentially scrubbed from the internet for a variety of reasons, but I would argue one of those reasons is the fact that it says Jeffrey Epstein's closest business partners were three men: Leslie Wexner, Donald Trump, and Bill Gates. And this is in 2001. Okay, Epstein victim Maria Farmer, who was the first person to report Jeffrey Epstein to the FBI, says that they talked about, she witnessed Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein talking about Bill Gates like they knew him super well in 1995. Between those two things, I think there is plenty of reason to assume and believe that Bill Gates and Epstein knew each other long before 2011, which is the official story of their first meeting. But even if you believe the official story, well, actually, let me go back a second. The fact that Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates would have had business ties in 2001 in the 1990s is very significant, because what Jeffrey Epstein did, in addition to his horrible crimes against girls and women, was he did shadow banking for intelligence agencies, and he laundered money. So what was Bill Gates doing with a guy who did that? Because pretty much ever since Epstein started his sexual blackmail operation in the early 90s, that was his full-time job. And what he was also involved with some, like the CIA airline, Southern Air Transport, and a bunch of other shady activity, but he was also involved in money laundering in the real estate markets and in other ways during this period of time. The only reason Bill Gates would have business ties with someone is because of Jeffrey Epstein's expertise in shadow banking and insider trading, right? So I think that's really significant. Personally. But anyway, beyond that, allegedly, their reason for knowing each other, if you believe the official story, had to do with interests in charity. Bill Gates Foundation worked with Jeffrey Epstein. Gates funneled charitable donations through Epstein to different institutions instead of making them directly. Why would he do that? Bill Gates has not given any explanation really for that, just saying, well, Jeffrey Epstein knew a lot of rich people. Well, if you're like one of the richest men in the world, why do you need Jeffrey Epstein to connect you with other rich people? It doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? But anyway, beyond that, I would argue, if you just want to believe the official story about when they met, that a lot of it had to do with science. And I say this because a lot of the meetings that Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein are documented to have attended, at least per mainstream media, they were not. It wasn't just Bill Gates and Epstein. It was also Bill Gates' former science advisor, Boris Nikolic. And Boris Nikolic was actually named the backup executor to Jeffrey Epstein's will. That is not a position, you don't like name someone to be either the executor or backup executor of your will if you don't know them really well. Okay, so Boris Nikolic, like I said, was the science advisor to Epstein, or to Gates, right? So what type of science was Jeffrey Epstein interested in per mainstream media? Eugenics and transhumanism. I think that's really disturbing when you consider a lot of the things that Bill Gates is promoting, including this ID 2020 thing that he partially funds, which is sort of like this injection of biometric ID. It's being fielded in Bangladesh right now through vaccines. So the vaccinations that children in Bangladesh receive comes with this injectable biometric ID system as per ID 2020. It was also tested on homeless people in Austin, Texas. Not exactly a population that in a good position to give informed consent, I would argue.
As if this pandemic wasn't already bad enough, now we're being subjected to asinine threats from the friends of everyone's favorite dead billionaire child sex trafficker and devil-may-care eugenicist, Jeffrey Epstein. They tell us the government has the right to stab us in the arm with potentially life-threatening new vaccines anytime they damn well feel like it.
You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated, meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
But at least Alan Dershowitz promises to keep his underpants on while he massages away our civil liberties.
Dershowitz is a longtime friend of Epstein's who represented him in the criminal underage sex case.
I never saw a young underage woman.
Yet Epstein's former butler swore under oath that Dershowitz was at Epstein's residences at the same time underage girls were there.
Were there young women in another part of the house giving massages when I wasn't around? I have no idea of that.
Dershowitz did say he once received a massage at Epstein's mansion, but from an adult woman.
I kept my underwear on during the massage. I don't like massages particularly.
Welcome to 2020's Society of the Spectacle, where fake news is sacred and the truth is banned on YouTube.
What do you think of waterboarding? I said it's absolutely fine.
In the past, I've often thought of Donald Trump as an American reincarnation of Benito Mussolini. But it might be fair to compare him to Boris Yeltsin, the bumbling first president of Russia. During the early 1990s, Epstein pal Larry Summers and the arch Machiavellians at J.P. Morgan Chase goaded Yeltsin into setting up a free market economy that saw the state's assets plundered in rigged auctions that bestowed the power and wealth of oligarchs onto the post-Soviet equivalent of mafia bosses. And now Trump seems to be handing over a pandemic-crippled America to similar bad actors hiding behind the facades of BlackRock, the Fed, and the Fauci-led vaccine mafia.
Look out!
For most of the world's population, this pandemic has felt like a random screwing by pantsless maniacs on an epic scale. And now, as the facts begin to emerge, it appears we've been told to commit economic and social suicide based on wrong methods and wrong information. Take Neil Ferguson as an example, the feckless, horn-dog professor of mathematical biology at Imperial College London, who came up with a computer model that predicted 500,000 people would die from COVID-19 unless the UK went into lockdown. Ferguson's model turned out to be wildly off the mark. The UK death toll from COVID-19 was only nearing 10,000 as it passed its peak well before the lockdown introduced by the government on March 23rd could have had a significant impact. It also turned out that Ferguson's department at Imperial College had accepted a $79 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation during the same month that he was making his insane and scary predictions. Then, in early May, as if to underscore his lack of integrity, Professor Lockdown resigned from the government's Virus Advisory Board after disregarding his own lockdown protocols to indulge in some random screwing with another man's wife.
The list of who benefits is the same list as the people setting policy and the people pressuring governments to pledge our taxpayer money for their plandemic.
There's a whole flock of bought-off shitbirds like Neil Ferguson out there. They all have names and addresses, and we should know them to keep those lying bastards honest. If a pervasive dishonesty is afflicting our culture and we're unaware of it, then we can't fix it.
If you have in the past dismissed concerns about the growing, encroaching, technocratic, totalitarian surveillance and control over every aspect of your life and are now realizing how deep we are in this situation, then you are underprepared for an event that is already starting to take place. So you have a lot of catching up to do. In fact, we all do. We are behind on this game because there are exceptionally not just well-funded interests, but interests that literally create the money, have control of the money supply itself, who have been working for generations, if not centuries, on this plan to ensnare humanity. And the trap has been set. The bait is already in the trap. The trap is already starting to spring. Can we move out of the way in time? It is absolutely not assured, but I can assure you of one thing. If we do not understand what is happening at this point, to realize that this is about authoritarian, totalitarian, collectivist control over all of humanity, if we don't understand that is the problem that we are facing, then how can we ever possibly understand the real solutions?
My 2014 novel, The Snowden Avalanche, had a plot that revolved around the creation of an unhackable public website called shipbirds.com that would function as an obligatory, inescapable Facebook for the psychopathic power elite. Here's how it worked. Imagine if every single time a prominent politician, scientist, or pundit was featured on any media outlet, you could click on a link to discover his or her ties to all the lobbyists, corporate backers, NGOs, intelligence agency fronts, and any other organizations that had compromised their actions and caused them to harm the public. All those ties and covert financial arrangements would be mapped out in simple, easy-to-understand diagrams and text, so even a child could see how deep the corruption went. A website like that might go a long way toward eliminating the dishonest racketeering that has been destroying our public health and general welfare. On the flip side of that equation, if there's a massive deception going on that we know about and we choose to ignore it, then we're complicit. Are we ready to take on that responsibility? If we're not willing to do it for our own benefit, we should certainly do it for the sake of our children. If we don't, we'll find ourselves beholden to more psychopathic schemers like Henry Kissinger, telling us that the world could be set on fire if we don't submit to the globalist plan for a post-COVID New World Order. Submit or starve. Those are the only two options the toad-smug aspiring overlords like Kissinger will give you. Are you ready to sign up for a 47th chromosome?